Welcome to my channel. If you love heartfelt stories that carry deep meaning, please subscribe and stay with us. Your support keeps these stories alive. The storm came without warning. By the time Emma realized how bad it was, the streetlights were already flickering, and the rain was falling sideways against her windows. Thunder rolled across the valley like a roar that shook her bones. It wasn't just another rainy evening in Maple Hollow. It felt like the kind of night that would change things. She lived alone in a small cottage at the edge of the neighborhood, a quiet place surrounded by old maple trees and the hum of distant crickets. She had moved there 2 years ago, hoping to find peace after her divorce. But peace never really came. That night, the wind howled like something alive, and when the power went out, silence fell heavy in the darkness, broken only by the sound of water gushing through the street. Emma grabbed her flashlight and checked the windows. Across the yard, she saw her neighbor's porch light flicker once, then vanish. That house belonged to the Connors, a kind family who had moved in that spring. The father, Mark, worked long shifts as a truck driver, often away for days. His wife, Lucy, usually stayed home with their son, Noah, who was about 10 years old. But tonight, their driveway was empty. Mark's truck wasn't there. Emma remembered Lucy mentioning earlier that week they were visiting her sister overnight, which meant Noah was alone. Emma's heart tightened. She had seen the boy earlier that afternoon riding his bike in the drizzle, wearing a blue rain jacket too big for him. She'd waved, and he'd smiled shyly. Now, as the storm raged harder, she wondered if he was okay. Then she heard it, a faint sound through the wind. A cry. It wasn't the storm. It was human. She grabbed her coat, pulled her hood tight, and stepped into the rain. The cold hit like needles. She sloshed through ankle-deep water toward the Connors' porch, calling out his name. "Noah! It's Miss Emma! Are you all right?" The answer came as a muffled shout. "Help! The water! It's coming in!" Her heart dropped. She ran to the door and tried the handle. It was unlocked. Inside, the living room was dim, lit only by flashes of lightning. Water seeped under the back door, forming a shallow pool that spread across the floor. Noah stood on a chair clutching his backpack, eyes wide with fear. "It came in fast," he said, his voice trembling. "I tried to block it, but—" "It's okay," Emma said softly. "Come on. My house is on higher ground. We'll be safe there." He hesitated, looking toward the dark hallway. "Mom said not to leave the house." "I know," she said gently. "But sometimes, being safe means doing what's right, not what's planned." A crack of thunder shook the windows. Noah nodded. She helped him down, wrapped his raincoat tighter, and they stepped into the storm together. The walk back was brutal. The wind nearly pushed them sideways. Emma held his hand tight, guiding him along the path through knee-high water. Her flashlight flickered once, then died. For a moment, they stood in total darkness. She could barely see his small figure beside her. Then lightning split the sky, and she caught sight of her cottage, still standing, still dry. "Almost there," she said. They stumbled onto her porch, drenched and shaking. Inside, she wrapped him in blankets, lit candles, and made hot cocoa on her old gas stove. Noah's eyes softened. "Thank you," he whispered. Emma smiled, sitting across from him. "You did the brave thing tonight." They sat in the glow of the candles, listening to the storm rage outside. But when the thunder faded into a low rumble and silence crept back in, Noah looked up and said something that made her chest tighten. "Miss Emma," he said quietly. "I didn't tell you everything." Her hand froze around the mug. "What do you mean?" He swallowed, his voice barely a whisper. "There's someone else in the house." Emma's breath caught. "What?" He looked at her with wide, frightened eyes. "I heard them before you came. In the kitchen. I thought it was the wind, but it wasn't." The candlelight flickered across his pale face, and for a moment, The storm outside didn't seem like the scariest thing anymore. The moment those words left Noah's mouth, Emma felt a cold chill crawl down her spine. She tried to stay calm. The house creaked softly under the wind, and the rain hammered against the roof like 1,000 small fists. "Are you sure you heard someone, Noah?" she asked gently. He nodded quickly, his eyes darting toward the darkened window. "I was trying to block the back door when I heard footsteps, heavy ones, and something fell, like a pan." Emma swallowed hard. It could have been the storm, a loose branch, the wind. But something in his voice told her it wasn't just imagination. She stood, grabbed the flashlight from the counter and checked it. It flickered back to life. "You stay here," she said. "Lock the door behind me." "No, please don't go alone," he whispered. She hesitated. His fear was too real to ignore. So she nodded. "Okay. Stay close, but quiet." They stepped into the hallway. The old wooden floor creaked beneath their feet. Water dripped from their soaked clothes. The beam of the flashlight swept across framed photos, furniture, and shadows that danced along the walls. The kitchen door stood slightly ajar, swaying in rhythm with the gusts outside. Emma pushed it open slowly. "Hello? Anyone here?" Nothing. Only the sound of rain against the window pane. She moved the light across the room. A few dishes lay shattered on the floor. The back door was wide open, banging softly in the wind. It must have blown open, she thought. The noise, the footsteps. It all made sense now. But then she saw it. A trail of muddy footprints, small ones leading inside. Her heart thumped. "Noah," she whispered. "Did you come in through this door?" He shook his head. "No, I was in the living room." Before she could speak again, lightning flashed outside, and for a split second she saw a figure by the back fence. A man, tall, still, watching. Emma gasped and stepped back. "Get away from the window!" She pulled Noah behind her, heart pounding in her ears. The figure didn't move. Then the next flash came, and he was gone. She closed the door, locked it, and pulled the curtains tight. Her hands trembled as she turned to Noah. "It's okay," she said, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. "It's probably just a neighbor checking things." Noah stared at her. "At this hour?" Thunder rolled again. Emma took a deep breath. "We'll stay here tonight. Nothing's going to happen." She led him back to the living room, set the flashlight on the table, and added more blankets. The warmth of the candles made the space feel almost safe again. Almost. Noah sipped the last of his cocoa, then looked up. "You think it could have been my dad?" Emma blinked. "Your dad? Why would he—" "He was supposed to come home tonight," the boy said softly. "Mom said he'd try if the roads were clear, but then the storm hit." Her mind raced. That made sense. Maybe Mark had tried to get home and got caught in the storm. The footprints, the figure. Maybe it was him. "Maybe you're right," she said, forcing a small smile. "If it was him, he's probably back at your house by now." Noah's face brightened just a little. "Can we check in the morning?" Of course. The clock on the wall had stopped at 9:45 p.m. The house felt frozen in time. The storm outside still screamed, but inside, silence settled in thick layers. After a while, Noah fell asleep on the couch, clutching his backpack. Emma sat in the dim glow of the candles, watching the flames dance. Her mind drifted back to her own son, Ethan, who would have been the same age as Noah if he were still alive. It had been 3 years since that winter morning when the ice took her boy. She had never truly recovered. She had promised herself she'd never let herself care again. But sitting there, looking at Noah's sleeping face, she felt something stir, a tenderness she thought she'd buried long ago. Outside, the storm began to fade. The wind softened. The rain eased to a whisper. Emma stood and peeked through the window. The street was a mess. Fallen branches, a toppled trash can, and muddy water glistening under faint lightning. Then, in the corner of her yard, something moved. Not the man. Not an animal. It was Noah's blue bicycle, propped upright, clean, as if someone had just placed it there. Her stomach dropped. That bike had been lying in the Connors' yard when she left to get Noah. She remembered stepping over it in the flood. It wasn't possible. She turned to look at Noah. He was still asleep, peaceful, unaware. And outside, a faint shadow lingered near the edge of the trees, watching the house. The first light of dawn crept through the clouds, painting the soaked earth in shades of gray and silver. The storm had finally passed, but its silence felt strange. Too still, too heavy. Emma hadn't slept. She sat by the window, her eyes fixed on that bicycle. It was still there, standing neatly by the fence like it had never been touched by the storm. Who would have done that? She looked back at Noah, who was still asleep under the blankets, his chest rising and falling softly. She didn't want to wake him, but she couldn't ignore what she'd seen. When she finally stepped outside, the air was thick with the smell of wet earth and pine. The ground squished beneath her boots. She walked toward the bike, her heart thudding with every step. The seat was dry, too dry. Someone had moved it recently. She crouched, inspecting the muddy prints around it. Large boot marks, half faded by rain but fresh enough to tell a story. They led from the edge of the woods, straight toward her house. Emma's breath caught. Then she heard it, a low creak behind her. She spun around. Flashlight in hand, a man stood near the porch. He was tall, wearing a soaked brown jacket, his hair plastered to his forehead. He looked exhausted, almost dazed. "Mark?" she whispered. The man blinked, squinting as if trying to recognize her. Emma? It was him, Noah's father. Relief flooded her so fast her knees almost gave out. "Thank God," she breathed. "Noah's safe." "He's inside!" Mark stumbled forward, his boots squelching in the mud. "You found him?" Yes, he was scared. The house was flooding. "I brought him here last night." Mark nodded slowly, glancing toward her front door. His face was pale, his eyes dark with fatigue, or something else. "I came home early," he said. "Roads were bad. I tried calling, but the lines were down." Emma's pulse began to slow. Maybe all the fear, all the shadows were just coincidences. Just the storm. But then Mark looked at the bicycle. His brow furrowed. "I didn't move that." Emma froze. "What?" He shook his head. "I saw it lying in the yard when I came back. Didn't even touch it." A chill swept through her again. "Then who did?" Mark didn't answer. He just looked past her toward the woods. The trees swayed gently in the wind, dripping with rain. "Someone's been around," he murmured. "I saw a flashlight last night, just before I reached the house. Thought maybe it was you." Emma's throat tightened. It wasn't. For a long moment, they both stood there in the silence of the morning. The only sound was the distant drip of water from the eaves. "Come inside," she said finally. "You need to rest." When they stepped in, Noah stirred awake. His eyes widened when he saw his father. "Dad!" Mark knelt and pulled him into a hug, his voice breaking slightly. "Hey, buddy. You okay?" "I thought you were gone," Noah whispered. "I'm here now," Mark said softly. Emma turned away to give them space. Her chest ached, not with fear this time, but something deeper. Seeing them together reminded her of everything she'd lost. She busied herself in the kitchen, brewing coffee over the gas flame. The smell filled the air, warm and grounding, but her thoughts wouldn't settle. She couldn't shake that feeling that something else had been out there during the storm. When she brought the mugs over, Mark was staring out the window again. "You said you saw someone?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "Could have been a neighbor, but no one else should have been out in that weather." He hesitated. "There've been break-ins lately. A few houses near the lake. People taking tools, fuel, whatever they can grab." Emma's stomach tightened. "Do you think they were here?" "Maybe," Mark said. Maybe they thought everyone was gone. A branch tapped softly against the window, making her jump. Mark noticed and gave a tired half-smile. "It's over now," he said. "We're safe." But she could tell. Even he didn't fully believe that. Later that afternoon, after the roads cleared, Mark said he needed to check the house and see the damage. Emma offered to watch Noah while he went. As the hours passed, the sunlight returned, warm and golden through the curtains. Noah played quietly with a deck of cards on the table. For the first time in 2 days, it felt almost normal. Then, just as Emma began to relax, there was a soft knock at the door. She frowned. Mark wouldn't knock. She opened it slowly. A police officer stood there, raincoat draped over his shoulders, his cruiser parked at the end of the muddy path. His face was grave. "Ma'am," he said politely, "sorry to bother you. We're checking on residents after the storm. There have been reports of a break-in nearby. Did you see anyone suspicious last night?" Emma hesitated. "I might have." The officer nodded. "If you did, please be careful. The suspect's dangerous. He escaped custody 2 days ago." Her blood ran cold. "Escaped?" "Yes, ma'am. A man named David Miller. Early 40s. About 6 feet tall, brown hair, wearing a dark jacket." Emma's heart stopped. She looked past the officer toward the Connors' house, then back at her door. Inside, Noah was humming softly. Mark's muddy jacket hung on her chair, dark brown. Torn at the sleeve, exactly as the officer described. Emma's hands went cold. The officer's voice faded under the pounding of her heartbeat. She turned slightly, just enough to glance toward the kitchen. Mark's jacket hung there, dark brown, torn at the sleeve, still damp from the storm. "Ma'am?" the officer said again. "Did you see anyone matching that description?" Her throat felt dry. I might have," she managed. "Last night during the storm." He leaned forward. "Did you speak to him?" Her lips parted, but no words came. How could she explain? That the man fitting that description was right inside her house? That Noah had just called him Dad? "No," she said softly, shaking her head. "I just saw someone near the woods." "I couldn't tell who." The officer nodded. "All right. Please keep your doors locked. If you notice anything unusual, call us right away." "I will," she said. He tipped his hat and turned back to his cruiser, leaving muddy footprints on the path. Emma shut the door, her fingers trembling. The air inside the house suddenly felt heavy, too quiet, too still. Noah looked up from his cards. "Who was that?" "Just the police," she said gently. "Checking on people after the storm." He nodded and went back to his game. But her eyes drifted to the jacket again, torn at the sleeve. Just like the officer said. Mark returned not long after, carrying a toolbox and a small bag of groceries. "Roads are bad, but I made it to the store," he said. "Got us some soup mix and bread." Emma forced a smile. "That's good." He noticed her tone and frowned. "Something wrong?" She hesitated. "A police officer stopped by." Mark froze. What did he want? "Checking on everyone," she said carefully. He mentioned a man escaped from custody. A man named David Miller. Mark's face went pale. "What?" "They said he was dangerous," she continued, her eyes never leaving his. "About your height." "Wearing a brown jacket." He swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. "That's not me." "I didn't say it was," she said softly. "But your jacket—" He cut her off, his voice suddenly sharp. "I found it." Her breath hitched. "You found it?" He rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding her eyes. "At the edge of the road." Mine was soaked through, so I switched. I didn't think it mattered. Emma wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe every word. But something about his tone, the quickness of his defense, it didn't feel right. "Mark," she said quietly, "where were you last night?" "I told you. On my way home. In the storm?" She pressed. "You didn't call. You didn't message. You just appeared this morning." He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed and turned away. "You don't trust me." She didn't answer. From the couch, Noah looked between them, his small voice cutting through the tension. "Dad, what's wrong?" Mark forced a smile. Nothing, buddy. We're fine. But Emma saw it then. The faint shake in his hands, the way he kept glancing toward the window, like someone might be watching. After dinner, Mark went outside to check the generator. The sky was dark again, thick with low clouds. Emma waited until she heard the door close, then took the jacket from the chair. Her hands trembled as she searched the pockets. A folded piece of paper fell out. She unfolded it carefully, her heart pounding. It was a photo, water-stained but clear enough to recognize. A woman she didn't know. And a small boy. Neither of them was Noah. Her stomach turned. She flipped the photo over. Scrawled in faded ink were the words, "Don't forget where you belong." Her breath caught. The back door creaked open. Emma spun around, clutching the paper. Mark stood in the doorway, rain dripping from his hair. His eyes met hers, and in that instant, she knew he'd seen what she was holding. "Where did you get that?" he asked quietly. "It was in your jacket," she said, her voice shaking. "Who are they?" He didn't move. Didn't blink. Finally, he sighed and sat down, his face drawn and tired. "You deserve the truth," he said. The room seemed to shrink around them. Even the rain outside had gone silent. "My name isn't Mark Connor," he said. "Not really," Emma's breath caught. "What?" He looked up at her, eyes full of something between shame and exhaustion. "My real name is David Miller," she stumbled back, hitting the edge of the counter. No, that's impossible." "I didn't escape," he said quickly. "I was released, early, but the police don't know it yet. It takes time for paperwork to clear." Emma shook her head, her pulse racing. "Released from what?" He looked down. "A fight. Years ago. Went bad. A man got hurt. I served my time. Then why hide?" she asked. "Because no one believes men like me change," he said softly. "I changed my name, moved here, started over. Lucy knew. She forgave me." Emma's thoughts spun. Could it be true? Or was it a lie wrapped in just enough truth to sound real? "I came back last night to protect my son," he said. "When I saw you take him, I didn't know who you were. I followed you here to make sure he was safe. But when I saw the light in your window, I couldn't knock. Not until morning." His voice broke on the last words. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Emma stared at him. This man who might be a father, or a fugitive, or something in between. Finally, she whispered, "If what you're saying is true, then why didn't you just tell me?" He looked at her with tired eyes. "Because I didn't think you'd listen." Outside, thunder rumbled again, distant, low, like an echo of the night before. And just as Emma opened her mouth to respond, Noah's voice called from the hallway, "Dad, there's someone outside." Emma turned toward the window instantly. Noah stood by the curtain pointing with a trembling hand. Outside, in the half-light of the fading evening, a shadow moved across the yard, slow, careful, deliberate. David, or Mark, she still didn't know what to call him, rose to his feet at once. His voice dropped low. "Get back from the window, Noah!" The boy obeyed, his eyes wide with fear. Emma's pulse hammered in her ears. "Who is it?" David shook his head. "I don't know. Stay here." He reached for the flashlight on the counter and crept toward the front door. "Don't," Emma whispered. "Let the police handle it." But he didn't listen. He moved with quiet certainty, slipping outside into the drizzle. Emma held Noah close, her hands trembling. Every creak, every gust of wind made her heart race faster. She could see David's silhouette near the porch light, tense, alert. Then, from somewhere near the trees, came a voice. "David Miller!" Emma froze. The same police officer from earlier stepped into view, flashlight aimed toward the house. Another officer followed, hand resting on his holster. "Step away from the porch," the officer called. "We need to talk." David raised his hand slowly. "I'm not running," he said, his voice calm. "You've got this wrong." "Sir, on the ground," the officer said firmly. Emma pushed open the door, rain spattering her face. "Wait, he hasn't done anything wrong," she shouted. "He's been here with us all night. He saved that boy." The officer didn't look away from David. Ma'am, please step back. David lowered to his knees, his hands behind his head. The light from the cruiser flashed red and blue across the wet grass, turning the quiet night into chaos. Noah clung to Emma's arm. "Please don't take my dad," he whispered, tears filling his eyes. Emma held him close, her heart breaking. "They just need to ask him some questions," she said softly, but her own voice trembled. One of the officers spoke quietly into his radio, then turned toward David. "We have confirmation. The release order was delayed, but it checks out. You're clear, Mr. Miller." The tension shattered in an instant. David blinked in disbelief. "What?" The officer nodded, lowering his flashlight. "You're free to go. I'm sorry for the confusion. We've been trying to locate you to confirm your identity." Emma's knees nearly gave out from relief. Noah ran forward, hugging his father's waist. "I knew you didn't do anything," the boy said through sobs. David placed a shaking hand on his son's back. "It's okay, buddy. It's over." The officers apologized once more and drove off into the mist, their lights fading into the distance. When the yard fell silent again, Emma finally let herself breathe. The air smelled of wet earth and pine again, calm and clean. Inside, she poured 3 mugs of cocoa and set them on the table. None of them said much. The storm outside had passed, but the storm inside each of them still lingered quietly. David looked across the table, his eyes tired but gentle. "Thank you," he said. "For helping him. For not giving up." Emma shook her head. "You don't have to thank me. Anyone would have done the same." He smiled faintly. "No, not everyone would have walked into a flooded house for a stranger's kid." Her heart softened. "You're not a stranger anymore." They sat there for a long time, listening to the wind hum softly through the trees. Noah eventually fell asleep on the couch, his small hand curled under his cheek. David stood and looked out the window. "You know," he said quietly, "when I was in there, I promised myself if I ever got another chance, I'd make it count. Be the kind of man my son could look up to." Emma looked at him. "He already does." He turned toward her, eyes meeting hers in the golden glow of the candles. "You helped me remember that." She smiled, a soft, tired smile that came from somewhere deep. Maybe we both needed a reminder. The storm had stripped everything bare, the lies, the fear, the past. But somehow in its wake, something good had survived. Outside, the moon broke through the clouds, casting a silver glow over the soaked grass and quiet woods. The bicycle stood by the fence again, still upright. Waiting for the morning, Emma looked at it, then at the man across from her, the one who wasn't who she thought he was, but somehow had become someone she could trust. That night didn't just change her life, it changed her soul. Because sometimes, the people who walk into your storm aren't meant to stay forever. They're meant to show you the way out.